Walter Pearson walked quietly into the VIP lounge at JFK International Airport, exuding a quiet dignity that comes naturally after nearly 7 decades of experience. At 67, Walter didn't rely on flashy clothing to express his worth. His worn leather jacket and simple trousers hinted at comfort and humility rather than extravagance. Around him, sleek executives mingled, sipping expensive coffee and chatting softly. Sunlight streamed in through expansive windows, illuminating the sleek jets taxiing gracefully outside. Walter approached the polished mahogany counter and handed his boarding pass to Amanda Reed, the senior lounge attendant. She glanced at him briefly, then back at her computer. "Good afternoon," Walter said gently, his voice warm and calm. "Here's my boarding pass." Amanda paused, looking at him skeptically. At 42, Amanda had spent 15 years cultivating her reputation as the gatekeeper of the VIP lounge. Tall and immaculately groomed, she was known to reserve her respect only for passengers who clearly looked the part. Walter's modest appearance instantly raised her suspicion. She reluctantly took the boarding pass from Walter's extended hand, handling it as if it were somehow contaminated. Her eyes scanned quickly over it and a frown formed. "Sir, this lounge is strictly for first-class passengers. Clearly your ticket isn't valid." Walter smiled politely, his tone firm but respectful. "If you could please double-check, ma'am." Amanda sighed dramatically, drawing curious looks from nearby passengers. "Sir, I've done this job long enough to spot a fake ticket when I see one. And this," she waved the boarding pass dismissively, "is obviously fake." The nearby passengers' conversations hushed slightly, drawn into the unfolding drama. A young executive standing nearby discreetly took out his phone, sensing something noteworthy might occur. Walter's dark eyes narrowed just slightly, still composed. "Ms. Reed, I assure you that boarding pass was issued by Sky Nation Airways, directly." Amanda shook her head firmly, cutting Walter off with increasing impatience. "You are wasting my time, and that of our real passengers." With an overly theatrical gesture, Amanda held the boarding pass up and tore it dramatically into 2 halves. The tearing sound echoed sharply through the silent lounge, immediately capturing everyone's attention. A collective gasp filled the room. Several passengers turned sharply to see what was happening. One older woman whispered, "Did she just rip up someone's ticket?" Amanda casually dropped the torn boarding pass onto the counter, the pieces fluttering down carelessly like scraps of garbage. "Now, please leave the lounge immediately, or I'll have security escort you out." Walter didn't respond immediately. His face remained calm, but beneath that calm there was something powerful and unspoken. Nearby, a younger passenger who'd been quietly observing bent slightly to glance down at the torn boarding pass on the counter. His eyes suddenly widened, his face turning pale. He leaned toward his companion, whispering urgently but loud enough for several people nearby to overhear. "Wait, did she just tear up the owner's boarding pass?" Another ripple of shocked murmurs surged through the room. Amanda froze, her confident expression faltering slightly as she caught fragments of whispers spreading rapidly among the guests. Walter calmly reached into his jacket, removing his cell phone, and dialed a number, the entire lounge watching him silently. He spoke quietly yet deliberately, the authority in his voice unmistakable. "Jonathan," Walter said clearly, "I think it's time to reconsider our acquisition of Sky Nation Airways. Schedule a press conference in 30 minutes. We need to address this immediately." Amanda's expression drained of color, her mouth falling open. The room grew so silent you could hear each soft intake of breath. Dozens of eyes moved rapidly between Walter and Amanda, capturing everything on their phones, as the realization of what had just happened sank in. Walter gently ended the call, and slid his phone calmly back into his pocket, meeting Amanda's horrified eyes. His voice remained low and calm, each word precise and powerful. "Miss Reed, it seems you made a serious mistake." A man's voice trembled slightly, a panicked whisper. I'm sorry. I didn't know." Walter raised his hand slightly, silencing her with gentle authority. "Of course you didn't know. You judged based on what you saw, not what was true." He paused, letting the words hang heavily in the air. Around the lounge, passengers exchanged glances, phones still discreetly capturing every detail. Walter turned slowly toward a comfortable leather chair near the window. He looked back one final time at Amanda, compassion and quiet dignity in his eyes. "Actions have consequences," he said simply, his tone gentle but firm. "We'll talk again soon." As Walter walked quietly away, Amanda stood rooted behind the counter, visibly shaken, eyes wide with fear and disbelief. Guests continued to whisper among themselves, the phrase "owner" and "acquisition" bouncing softly but rapidly around the luxurious lounge. Walter sat down, adjusting his worn jacket, and glanced calmly out at the gleaming airplanes parked along the tarmac. His outward composure belied the fierce determination burning within. He had seen discrimination far too often throughout his life, quietly enduring indignities that many would never even notice. Today, though, things would be different. Walter was no longer powerless. He'd quietly spent months planning this acquisition, determined to rebuild SkyNation Airways with dignity and fairness as its core values. He hadn't planned on revealing his position so publicly or dramatically, but perhaps it was necessary. As he gazed thoughtfully at the runway, the murmurs behind him intensified. Phones continued recording, ensuring this incident would not be forgotten or quietly swept away. He felt no joy in Amanda's humiliation, yet he knew deeply that accountability mattered, especially in moments like this. Quietly, confidently, Walter took a deep breath, knowing that this moment marked not just the end of Amanda's career, but the beginning of something much larger, something better, something overdue. Sometimes it only takes one quiet act of dignity and one simple phone call to change everything. Walter Pearson didn't spend last night celebrating. Instead, he sat in a dimly lit study overlooking Atlanta's skyline, surrounded by folders and financial reports. At precisely 8:17 p.m., he clicked send on a secure email to his acquisition team. "I've signed the paperwork. SkyNation Airways is ours for $1,200,000,000, 0 cents. Prepare for tomorrow's quiet transition." He reclined, removed his aviator watch, gifted after his final combat sortie, and placed it on the polished desk. No champagne, no fanfare, just the steady beat of a heart accustomed to late nights and high stakes. Born in Savannah, Georgia, in 1956, Walter grew up under the shadow of Jim Crow, but refused to be hemmed in by its strictures. At age 18, he enlisted in the U.S. Air Force, determined to fly despite the barriers black pilots still faced. He trained at Moody AFB as one of the first African-American pilots in his squadron. His call sign, Black Bird, came from his uncanny ability to vanish into the night sky on reconnaissance missions. Over 120 combat sorties in the deserts of the Middle East and dense jungles of Southeast Asia earned him the Distinguished Flying Cross, a medal he still carried in a small velvet box. After retiring from active service, Walter spent 2 decades in private equity, building a reputation for integrity and long-term vision. He never chased headlines. Instead, he quietly backed emerging Black-owned businesses and veteran support initiatives. He served on nonprofit boards dedicated to clean energy research, always mindful that true power often lay beneath the surface. invisible until circumstances forced it into view. His decision to acquire Sky Nation Airways came after a chance conversation with a retired maintenance mechanic at a charity gala. The mechanic lamented, "Elite lounges treat folk like you belong until they see your pass." Walter's jaw clenched. He'd endured that indignity himself countless times. Over coffee that night, he realized the scale of change required. One lounge or one flight attendant might be fixed by a polite complaint, but an entire airline that would ripple outward. Later that week, he quietly reached out to his team. By month's end, negotiations were complete. Now, stepping into the VIP lounge at JFK for his inaugural flight under new ownership, Walter wore civilian clothes, dark chinos, a well-worn leather jacket, and a crisp white polo. No gold watch, no flashy lapel pin. He wanted to blend in until he chose to reveal himself. He moved through the lounge with casual interest, watching attendants greet passengers. He observed the smallest details, whether a glass of water arrived before a question was answered, the attentiveness of staff to someone who didn't look the part. Even in his unassuming outfit, Walter noticed how people shifted when they recognized someone famous. Yet today he remained a ghost. He paused by a tray of artisan pastries, croissants, pain au chocolat, even gluten-free almond financier. Slowly, deliberately, he selected a plain croissant, mindful of the ritual of first impressions. He paid no mind when a nearby banker frowned at his choice of seating in the far corner of the lounge. Of course, Walter's mind wandered back to his military years. He remembered the roar of jet engines as he climbed through neutral layers of night, the thrill of mastering 1,000 variables on a single mission. In those moments, the world was binary, mission success or failure. There was no room for half measures. That sense of precision informed his business dealings. Every contract clause, every non-disclosure agreement, every escrow account had to be airtight. At 6:45 a.m., a young operations manager approached him, notebook in hand. "Sir, I have the final manifest and your revised itinerary. Boarding's in 15 minutes at gate 17. The assistant's polite tone didn't betray recognition, yet Walter noted the slight tremor in her voice. She may not have known who he was, yet. He nodded and replied, "Thank you. I'll be there." He tucked the manifest into his jacket pocket, making sure no one could glimpse the small owner and chairman notation stamped faintly at the top. Moments later, Walter settled into a plush leather armchair near the window, cups of coffee and mobile chargers at his side. He watched the sun rise over the tarmac, bathing the fuselage in golden light. He allowed himself a brief smile. Tomorrow's board meeting would set the tone for his vision. Comprehensive bias awareness training, an overhaul of customer service protocols, and a commitment to equality he'd enforce personally. Still, he felt a flicker of anticipation. He knew this flight would test his new policies from the ground up. Would attendants default to courtesy when they recognized a simple veteran? Would they treat a black man with the same respect as they did a white executive in a tailored suit? Today, he'd find out. A subtle shift in atmosphere drew his attention. Passengers straightened in their seats, phones recharged in hand, ready to record anything noteworthy. Walter leaned forward, folding his hands. At exactly 6:55 IMM, the lounge attendant cleared her throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, boarding for flight 742 to Atlanta is now open." In that instant, every head turned toward the gate. Walter rose slowly, smoothing his jacket. He felt the weight of 30 years of discipline and duty settle on his shoulders like a familiar cloak. He walked toward gate 17 with measured steps, quiet, unassuming, invisible, until he chose to be seen. Because in a few moments, one unmistakable fact would become clear. This was no ordinary passenger, and this was no ordinary flight. Walter Pearson steps onto the jet bridge with the same calm determination he showed in the lounge. The polished aluminum corridor smells faintly of jet fuel and carpet cleaner. He pauses for a moment, letting the hum of the aircraft's systems wash over him, then walks down the narrow aisle of the Boeing 737. He carries only a small leather briefcase. The rest of his belongings are stowed in the overhead bin. At the front of the cabin, Flight Attendant Amanda Reed stands beside the galley, barking orders to her team. She spots Walter and straightens her crisp navy uniform, smoothing wrinkles from her skirt. Behind her, 2 junior attendants follow her lead, anxiety written on their faces. Amanda forces a polite smile. "Good morning, sir," she says, barely making eye contact. She gestures towards seat 2A. "That's your seat, right up here." Walter nods and moves past her. He glances at the white leather upholstery, immaculate, expensive, designed to convey exclusivity. As he settles into 2A, he hears other passengers being greeted wanly. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Thompson," or "Good morning, Mrs. Patel. Champagne or orange juice?" While Amanda's gaze flicks away from him the moment he sits down, he notices the subtle shift. She serves the passenger in 2B a pre-departure beverage before she asks him. The first-class stewardess pours a flute of Dom Perignon for a sharply dressed businessman wearing a bespoke charcoal suit. Only after the man's glass is full does Amanda turn to Walter. "Water? Soda?" she asks, voice clipped. "A sparkling water, please," Walter replies evenly. Amanda's eyes dart toward the beverage cart, then back to her handheld tablet. She taps a few times, makes a dismissive noise, and walks away without another word. Walter waits. No ice, no water. A woman in 2C leans forward. "Excuse me, is everything okay?" she whispers, concerned. Walter offers a small smile. "Just a minor delay." Another passenger, a young startup founder in 2D, watches the interaction closely. He pulls out his phone, palms concealed, and hits record. Walter closes his eyes, takes a slow, deliberate breath, and lets minutes tick by. He could speak up. He remembers how, long ago, he'd confronted a junior officer who disrespected an enlisted airman. But today, he chooses silence, a form of power in itself. Amanda's neglect only reinforces the message she thinks she's sending, that he somehow doesn't belong. Down the aisle, the cabin crew finishes the drink service for the rest of first class. Amanda clicks her radio. "Cabin secure," she announces curtly. She never looks at Walter again. The engines spool up behind him. The captain's voice comes over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Sky Nation Flight 742 to Atlanta. We'll be wheels up in approximately 5 minutes." At once, the tension Walter has carried begins to seep into the cabin. Some passengers shift uncomfortably in their seats. Others lean toward their neighbors, whispering and glancing at the stewardesses. Walter watches Amanda through the corner of his eye. She presses her lips together, as though she's unaccustomed to being watched. Maybe she reads a name badge. Maybe she notices the subtle crease in his brow. Either way, she looks away abruptly. A flight attendant a few rows back, Sophia, catches sight of Walter's watch, the old aviator model gleaming against his wrist. Recognizing the style, her eyes widen. She leans quietly toward Amanda. "Miss Reed," she whispers. "I think that's the owner." Amanda's jaw ticks. She glances at Walter, whose posture remains perfectly relaxed. He's leaning back, hands folded in his lap, as if this is exactly where he belongs. And in fact, it is. Amanda forces herself to smile. "Thank you," she murmurs, her voice tighter than before. She steps away as passengers raise their phones, filming every expression on her face. Walter feels the cabin's collective gaze shift onto him. He inhales slowly and exhales even more deliberately, as though he's letting the moment build just enough pressure. Nobody knows how much power he holds, not until he's ready to reveal it. The seatbelt sign dings on. Amanda spins on her heels and strides down the aisle toward the back, barking one more instruction into her radio. He hears the scratch of pen on paper, someone probably jotting down notes, or maybe complaints. Walter reaches into his pocket and pulls out a slim envelope, embossed in gold. Board of Directors, Nation Airways. He traces his finger over the edge. Inside is the first draft of a memorandum to the entire company, a comprehensive plan for mandatory bias awareness training, revamped customer service standards, and new metrics to ensure every passenger is treated with equal respect. He slips the envelope back into his pocket. He's not yet ready to distribute it, but when he does, it will carry the full weight of his authority. In the background, a flight attendant announces, "Please make sure your seatbelts are securely fastened. We will be taxiing shortly." Walter clicks his belt into place and sits up straighter. His expression betrays nothing. No anger, no triumph, just calm resolve. The tape of Amanda's earlier indignity has already been sent to dozens of smartphones. Within minutes, it will explode across social media. But for now, in this moment of forced stillness, the truth is quietly unfolding. Amanda's decision to ignore and offend him has already set the next act in motion. A gentle smile crosses Walter's lips. He watches the young founder in 2D glance at him again, tablet poised, ready to live stream. Over his shoulder, he hears a woman murmur, "He looks so composed for someone who's being ignored." And composed he is, because he's counting on that exact reaction. Quiet power, inexorable presence. He doesn't need to raise his voice. The engines roar to life fully now, and he feels the subtle vibrations through his seat. In a few moments, they'll lift off, and the cabin will transform from a place of frustration to a place of motion and purpose. But none of that matters until the plane clears the taxiway, until Amanda Reed feels the weight of her error, not just in lost ticket sales, but in the tarnished reputation of an entire airline. As the aircraft begins to glide forward, Walter closes his eyes for a heartbeat. When he opens them again, he's not just a passenger. He's the man who will demand better, from SkyNation's boardroom to every first-class lounge it operates. And it all started with a single act of discrimination, an act he allowed to unfold, knowing that the real reckoning would come not from his words, but from the unstoppable momentum that discrimination itself would create. The plane wheels lift from the runway. For Walter, the journey has only just begun. Walter Pearson sat in the soft glow of the cabin light, the hum of the engines like a distant heartbeat. He gazed out the oval window at sheets of cloud below, remembering another sky far away, one that had tested him in ways that no first-class lounge ever could. He was 22 then, fresh from Moody Air Force Base in Georgia. He'd been one of the first black pilots in his training squadron. So new, in fact, that his fellow cadets didn't know how to treat him. Some shot sideways glances, others refused to call him by name, offering "sir" only when orders were barked. His call sign became Blackbird, not as a badge of honor, but as a quiet jab. A bird out of place, eyes wide, wings black, against a sky that wasn't yet ready to accept him. On his first deployment to the Gulf, Walter stared down at an endless expanse of desert from the cockpit of an A-10 Thunderbolt II. He'd been tasked with close air support, the same missions that later earned him the Distinguished Flying Cross. But those medals hadn't changed how he was treated on the ground. At base briefings, he and the other minority pilots were sometimes herded to the back of the room, told to enter through the colored entrance when they went for dinner or to the officers' club. He'd smile, nod, never complain publicly, but inside his blood had boiled. How dare they treat him as less than? He'd fought for this country, flown through flak and fire, and still the world saw him as an outsider. One assignment stuck with him more than the rest. Over northern Iraq, his aircraft had taken heavy anti-aircraft fire. One missile shred ripped through the wing, sending his controls haywire. Alarms blared, dials spun. In that frenzy, he remembered his own instructor's words, "Stay calm. Your training is stronger than their bullets." He banked sharply, felt the A-10 shudder, then regained control. He landed on a crippled runway with 45 minutes of fuel left. A feat that, by any metric, merited a medal. And he got one. But later, when his maintenance crew wheeled him to the Hall of Heroes, a senior officer reportedly muttered, "Good for him, for a colored pilot." Walter heard it. He never forgot. Yet in every insult and slur, he found a reason to push harder. In every doubter's sneer, he carved out a victory. He'd survived hills of bureaucracy, valleys of prejudice, and storms of combat, all by refusing to back down. When he retired from the Air Force at 35, his service record boasted over 120 combat sorties and 0 mission failures. He left with the Distinguished Flying Cross pinched tight in his pocket and a promise to himself. Never again would he be silenced by someone else's prejudice. The memory of that desert sky lit a fire in him when, years later, he sat across a polished mahogany table in a Manhattan boardroom negotiating the acquisition of Sky Nation Airways. He thought of every pilot who'd been shuffled aside, every veteran who'd been ignored at a veterans charity event, every passenger who'd been judged by skin color instead of merit. He signed the papers that day not for profit alone, but for justice. The $1,200,000,000 0 cents price tag wasn't just a number. It was his declaration that dignity should never have a price. The cabin lights dimmed further as the flight climbed. Walter touched the distinctive Flying Cross pin on his lapel through the white polo shirt he wore under his leather jacket. It reminded him of nights spent hunched over charts, planning routes that minimized civilian risk. It reminded him of fellow pilots who'd fallen and the families who'd grieved. But most of all, it reminded him that excellence required sacrifice, and that he owed every ounce of his success to those who paved the way. A soft chime signaled the flight attendant's final cabin check. Walter inhaled deeply, letting the cool, recycled air fill his lungs. He was here now, not just as a passenger, but as a steward of change. The thousands of miles he'd flown in uniform had taught him that wars weren't always fought with bullets. Sometimes they were fought with policy, with corporate balance sheets, with alliances forged in boardrooms rather than bunkers. Across the aisle, a young passenger tapped out a message on a tablet. Why is he so calm? Did anyone see what happened in the lounge? Walter's jaw tightened. He knew the story was spreading like wildfire. In a few hours, news outlets would feast on headlines about the torn boarding pass, the humiliating scene, the quiet call that exposed the acquisition. And yet, he welcomed it. Every click, every share, every shocked gasp meant another step toward the accountability he'd dreamed of since youth. He let his mind drift back to Georgia, to the man who'd refused to let him into the pilot's briefing room because of his skin. Walter closed his eyes and envisioned that younger self, trembling but determined, strapping into an F-15 cockpit at dawn. He'd tell that young man, "You belong here, and one day you'll own the sky's grandest stage." Below him, the engines droned steadily. Ahead, he would unveil a new era for Sky Nation Airways. Mandatory bias awareness training, equal opportunity policies, and customer service standards rooted in respect. He'd hold himself and every employee to the highest bar, ensuring that no human being ever felt like an outsider in his airline again. The seatbelt sign chimed off. Walter stood, smoothing the front of his jacket. He offered a small nod to the cabin crew as they passed, their expressions a mix of awe and apprehension. They didn't yet know who he was, but that was fine. His power lay in substance, not spectacle. As he stepped into the aisle, he felt the weight of history settle on his shoulders, both the burdens he'd carried and the victories he'd won. He understood that true leadership often spoke in hushed tones, not boisterous proclamations. And so, with quiet resolve, Walter Pearson moved forward into the next chapter of his fight, proving that dignity and excellence were rights afforded to all, not just the privileged few. Tonight, he'd sleep in an Atlanta hotel, preparing for tomorrow's board meeting. But in his dreams, he'd return to desert skies and the roar of jet engines, reminded that the person who tamed the heavens could also transform an airline from within. One respectful decision at a time. Less than an hour after takeoff, the cabin lights dimmed for cruise service, and flight attendant Amanda Reed slipped into the crew galley to refill her water pitcher. She was still flush from the early morning drama. Tearing Walter Pearson's boarding pass had felt like pure justice in her eyes. But while she basked in the glow of imagined triumph, opportunity quietly tapped her on the shoulder. "Hey, Amanda," whispered Sophia James, the junior attendant who'd earned a reputation for thoroughness. Sophia shifted a small stack of service carts aside and brushed her auburn hair from her face. "I don't know if you caught it, but the manifest for first class, there's a footnote next to Walter Pearson's name." Amanda didn't look up. She snapped the galley drawer shut. "Sophia, I already dealt with this. Mr. Pearson isn't special." She turned to pour water into a crystal glass for another passenger. "He can't storm up here demanding VIP treatment. We have protocols." Sophia's eyebrows knit together. "I get that, but it literally says owner and chairman right there in the fine print. The manifest code you scanned? It's O&C, and..." She bit her lip, glancing nervously toward the cabin. "That call he made downstairs? It wasn't just a hot mic or a prank. He told someone he closed a $1,200,000,000 0-cents deal to buy this airline." Amanda snapped her head around, finally meeting Sophia's wide-eyed stare. "You're kidding me," she said, voice low and urgent. But more than surprise, her face registered irritation. "Sophia, are you trying to embarrass me? I have passengers to serve." "I'm not trying to embarrass you," Sophia insisted softly. "I'm telling you what's true. She glanced at the service window, where a well-dressed lawyer waited for his refill. "He isn't just another night crew deadhead. He owns the place, and you need to..." "Need to what?" Amanda's tone sharpened. She retrieved another glass and rattled it into place on the counter. "He never told me. You know how it is. People hide behind casual clothes, slip into first class, and expect handouts." She gave Sophia a pointed look. "I made the call I thought was right." Sophia took a breath. "But now you know. You can still fix this. Apologize. Reprint his pass. Acknowledge him. It's not too late." Amanda swept a stray lock of hair from her face and straightened her shoulders. "You do your job, I'll do mine," she said crisply, then pivoted away before Sophia could answer. The galley door slid shut behind her, and in that small space, opportunity sighed and walked away. Sophia's heart pounded as she glanced at the digital manifest again. Sure enough, Walter Pearson's name was stamped conspicuously in bold. Owner and chairman. She pointed at it, longing for Amanda to return, but the senior attendant had already disappeared down the aisle, resuming service without so much as a backward glance. Across the cabin, Walter sat in seat 2A, reading a file on his tablet. He glanced up as a passenger pressed the call button again, requesting an extra blanket. It was a small interruption, but he responded with his usual courtesy. Then noticed Sophia halfway down the aisle, hesitating near Amanda's station. She mouthed a silent, "He's the owner," then thought better of it and resumed pouring coffee for a passenger in 2D. Walter closed his eyes briefly and leaned back. He had seen countless moments like this in his life. A window of grace quietly offered, then slammed shut by wounded pride or stubbornness. He'd felt that sting at every turn, from Jim Crow enlistment barracks to White House briefings as a decorated pilot. He could have rose to his feet, confronted Amanda, clarified everything in a flash. But he chose not to. His power lay not in exposing her shame, but in letting her actions speak for themselves. A ripple of hushed whispers swept the cabin. Heads turned toward Amanda again, some with phones hidden in laps, ready to capture another viral moment. Amanda looked out the window at the drifting clouds, exhaling as though she'd just put an ugly moment behind her. Yet, across the aisle, a little boy craned his neck, whispering to his grandmother, "Did you hear? He's the man who just bought the whole airline." The grandmother nodded, eyes wide, sinking back into her seat with new respect. In the cockpit, First Officer Sarah Lindstrom leaned forward, her brow furrowed as she monitored their flight path. She caught Walter's name on the manifest before takeoff, labeled Owner and Chairman, and her jaw had dropped. She'd told the captain in hushed tones, who offered a wry smile but said nothing. "He lets them dig their own graves," Sarah recalled him saying once during training. Now she understood precisely what he meant. A few rows back, another flight attendant, Carlos, nudged Sophia. "She really ignored you?" he whispered, exasperated. Sophia shrugged helplessly. She'd rather be wrong than humble. Down the aisle, Amanda approached a VIP passenger's seat and polished the armrest with a crisp napkin. She busied herself straightening magazines, avoiding eye contact with any of the first-class travelers unless absolutely necessary. Each step she took felt heavier, burdened by the knowledge she'd dismissed a man of profound significance. Yet she acted as though nothing had changed. Walter closed his tablet and tapped his watch, a subtle reminder of the precision he lived by. He knew the moment that real reckoning would come. He could sense it in the stifled tension, the slight glances, the way the cabin had turned from routine service to a silent tribunal. Amanda's refusal to seize a chance to make things right had only deepened her misstep and delighted the invisible chorus of justice within him. The seatbelt sign chimed, signaling they were preparing for descent. Amanda glanced at her watch and hurried down the aisle to secure the cabin. She offered Walter a curt "Thank you for flying Sky Nation," her smile strained. He inclined his head lightly, and for a brief second, their eyes met. In that quiet glance, she saw something she'd never expected. A calm authority that needed no validation. A strength that rose from decades of adversity and triumph. Amanda swallowed hard and moved on, carrying her mistake with her. Walter watched her go, his face serene. He fingered the fine leather of his briefcase, already planning his next steps. A company-wide memo, personal conversations with the senior management team, and meetings in boardrooms that would shift the airline's culture for good. The moment had passed. The window of immediate apology closed forever, but the consequences would play out in ways she could never ignore. As the plane began its descent toward Atlanta, Walter leaned back, folded his hands, and allowed a small, satisfied smile. Some chances come only once. Amanda Reed had just let one slip through her fingers, and soon every passenger and employee of Sky Nation Airways would understand that true leadership demands humility as much as command. And sometimes, the quietest power waits patiently until the moment is ripe to reshape everything. The cabin had settled into a hushed lull. We were cruising at 35,000 feet, the gentle drone of the engines a constant reassuring pulse beneath the muted chatter and the soft rustle of newspapers. Amanda Reed moved down the aisle with an almost mechanical efficiency, checking overhead bins, straightening pillows, offering a last round of bottled water. The tension of the earlier incidents had faded into uneasy curiosity. Most passengers stared straight ahead, phone screens tucked discreetly out of view. Walter Pearson remained seated in 2A, tilted slightly toward the window, his posture composed. He held a slim travel folder on his lap, the board of directors embossed in gold, a silent reminder of exactly who he was. He'd sat through the post-service bustle with quiet patience, letting Amanda's hasty retreat and half-hearted apologies play out like a stage performance. Now, with cruise altitude reached and cabin secured for the long haul, it was time for him to make his move. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew the cell phone he'd used earlier in the lounge. The LED screen illuminated briefly. Jonathan, private line. He tapped a single button and placed the phone to his ear. Even at this altitude, the connection was flawless. "Jonathan?" Walter's voice was calm, low, carrying the unmistakable weight of authority. "We need to adjust our timeline. Sky Nation is ours, but after today's misunderstandings, I want a press conference no later than 30 minutes after we land in Atlanta. Inform the board and schedule it. Also, start drafting a public apology. We'll handle this head-on." He paused, listening. "Yes, I know this escalates everything, but it's necessary. No last-minute PR spin, just honesty. Let them know we're committed to integrity, to respect." "Understood. Make it happen." He ended the call with a gentle tap. The room of his hand was cool as he slid the phone back into his pocket. Around him, a ripple of unease spread through the cabin. A few seats down, a tall businessman in a pinstripe suit leaned forward, pulling his phone back out. A grandmother 2 rows over gently nudged her husband and whispered, "Did you hear that? He's calling for a press conference." Amanda, walking past the aisle, caught the phrase. Her chalk-white smile faltered. She glanced at Walter's seat, then hurried to the bulkhead, rubbing one hand over her forehead as if she'd just run a marathon. A junior attendant hovered nearby. "Amanda, are you okay?" the young woman asked, voice low. Amanda forced a nod. "Just a headache," she murmured, pressing a hand to her temple. She refused to look back at Walter, but her voice quivered enough that 3 passengers turned their heads in concern. Walter watched her through the corner of his eye, expression unreadable. He had no desire to humiliate Amanda further. His goal wasn't personal vengeance, but systemic change. Yet, letting her panic quietly in the galley served as a powerful indicator. Actions have consequences, and real accountability starts at the top. 2 rows behind him, a tech executive raised his phone. He was live streaming to a private group chat. "Breaking. Owner of Sky Nation Airways just ordered a post-flight press conference," he whispered, glance flickering to Walter. "This is huge." A ripple of murmurs cascaded through first class. Passengers shifted in their seats, some passing whispered commentary. "I can't believe it. He's not playing around. We're in for a show in Atlanta." The atmosphere crackled with anticipatory energy, so different from the polite restraint that normally defined these cabins. Walter closed his eyes briefly, letting the tension of the moment settle into a familiar resolve. He remembered his days at Moody Air Force Base, the quiet before a mission, when every second counted. This was his mission now. Transform an airline culture, one flight at a time. A soft chime sounded on his seatbelt buckle, signaling crew announcement. Amanda stood at the front of the cabin, struggling to steady her voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent into Atlanta," she announced. Words rushed. "Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." She stumbled back to her station, where she fumbled with her beverage trolley, nearly spilling water on a startled passenger in 2B. Several travelers exchanged awkward glances. "She's in over her head," whispered a woman in 2C. "Thought she could keep her composure? But I guess not." Walter tapped his watch. noting they'd be wheels down in less than 20 minutes. He leaned back and allowed himself a small, controlled smile. The real work was only beginning. The boardroom would convene, the press conference would unfold, and the world would watch Sky Nation's next steps. Whether they applauded or criticized, they would not ignore it. A young flight attendant handed him a hot towel, part of the upscale descent service. Walter accepted it with a nod of thanks, his demeanor composed as he wiped his hands. Amanda caught his eye for an instant as she cleared the galley, her face a mixture of guilt and fear. Walter offered a simple, understanding nod, more comforting than condescending. He didn't need to rub salt in her wounds, he only needed to set the example. Around him, the cabin door clicked shut. The flight deck intercom crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. Weather is clear in Atlanta and we anticipate a smooth approach. Please ensure your seatbacks and tray tables are in their full upright position. We'll be turning final in about 5 minutes." He looked out at the cotton-like banks of clouds, then turned back to the cabin. This flight had started with a torn boarding pass, an act of blind prejudice. Now it would end with honest accountability and a pledge from the new ownership, respect and dignity for every passenger, every employee. Amanda fired off a brief text, "We need to talk," on the ground. Walter didn't see it, but he heard the whispered commotion. He felt no triumph in her discomfort, rather he felt the familiar tug of a new beginning. A single phone call had set everything in motion. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Amanda took a deep breath and nodded to her team. "Let's prepare for arrival," she said with renewed professionalism, though her eyes still flicked to Walter's quiet figure. Walter Pearson sat back, folding his hands, and allowed himself to savor the charged anticipation. 20 minutes ago, he'd been dismissed as just another passenger. Now, he was the man who owned an entire airline and who would hold it to a higher standard. Because sometimes, one calm, deliberate call is all it takes to change everything. The cabin shifted the moment Walter's quiet phone call ended. Engines hummed overhead, but in first class, a different kind of current crackled through the air. A current of realization, shock, and anticipation. Walter Pearson sat back in 2A, fingers lightly tapping the armrest, eyes fixed on the shimmering horizon beyond the window. He'd expected subtle turbulence. He hadn't expected the soulful wake his single call would leave behind. Just down the aisle, Amanda Reed paused mid-step. She'd been refilling white wine for a regular in seat 2B when she heard a hushed whisper pass through the cabin. "He owns the airline." Heads turned, eyes narrowed. Smartphones slipped out and hovered behind polished palms. A ripple of muted gasps rolled from row to row. Sophia James, the junior attendant, hovered near Amanda's cart. She caught Amanda's wide-eyed glance and seized the moment. "Ma'am, he said press conference in 30 minutes. Her voice was low, urgent, not accusatory, but factual. Amanda's grip tightened on the stemware. For the first time since boarding, she looked genuinely rattled. 30 minutes? She echoed, voice unsteady. "He's calling the press after landing?" Sophia nodded, cheeks flushed. "That's what he said downstairs. And up here, I overheard him. He's not just a passenger." Behind them, a well-tailored retiree in seat ton C murmured into an earpiece, voice hushed but firm. "Yes, Mr. Powell. It's Frank at gate 17. We have a situation. The owner's aboard, and he's demanding a public statement. Please advise." Frank's words drifted back to Walter in a half-formed echo. In the cockpit, First Officer Sarah Lindstrom glanced at the manifest on her tablet. Big, bold letters stamped next to Walter's name, owner and chairman. She tapped the captain's shoulder, and they shared a grim nod. Within the flight deck, calm professionalism masked their mutual understanding. The story was unfolding, and they needed to stay the course until touchdown. Back in first class, the tech executive 2 rows behind Walter whispered to his neighbor, "This is better than cable news." The neighbor nodded, smartphone aloft, ready to capture everything. A trio of boardroom consultants in 3A, 3C leaned forward, conspiratorially, their weekend retreat cruise forgotten in an instant. Suddenly, the interphone crackled. "Amanda, come to the forward galley, please. Urgent," came a clipped voice from the flight purser. Amanda squared her shoulders and followed the voice of protocol. Sophia glanced at Walter, concern in her eyes. He offered a reassuring smile and a small nod, the kind that said, "It's time." In the forward galley, Amanda found the purser, Carlos Gutierrez, with his tablet in hand. His usual composure was shaken. "Amanda," he began quietly, "I've just received a call from operations in Atlanta. They've been told the owner is on board and corporate wants a full report on any incidents." Amanda's mouth went dry. He wants a report?" she stammered. Carlos nodded grimly. "Yes, and they want to know why security was involved earlier. They're asking for passenger statements, video logs, everything." He tapped at the tablet screen. "We'll need your account." A thrill of panic coursed through her. She'd believed the torn boarding pass was a minor kerfuffle, but now she understood the scale. This was no mere passenger grievance. It was a corporate crisis, and she was its unwitting protagonist. By the time Amanda returned to service, the cabin's atmosphere had shifted from hushed curiosity to a tangible buzz of expectancy. Walter sensed it too. He closed his folder, placing it gently on the armrest, then leaned back in his seat. His eyes met those of a young entrepreneur in 2C, whose phone hovered inches from his face. Walter offered a courteous nod, acknowledging their shared secret. He was pulling the strings. A few minutes later, the seatbelt sign chimed off. Amanda stepped forward, clipboard in hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, voice shaky but determined to maintain professionalism, "I'd like to address the recent confusion. Mr. Pearson," she paused, glancing at Treasury Street, lawful gentleman co-founder Mr. Pearson's smiling face, "is our new owner and chairman. I apologize for the misunderstanding earlier." A murmur of surprised relief and applause rippled through first class. Phones rose in unison, capturing every word. In that moment, Amanda's apology felt raw but genuine. A small step toward redemption. Walter inclined his head politely. "Thank you, Ms. Reed," he said, voice resonant enough for all to hear. "Let's ensure every guest on this flight feels valued." His calm command settled the cabin like a cool breeze. Amanda exhaled a breath she'd been holding since boarding. Overhead, the flight attendant call chime sounded insistently. Carlos passed by Amanda, giving her a subtle nod of support. Outside, Atlanta's twinkling lights grew larger through the window. Up in the flight deck, Sarah called down, "We're about 5 minutes from touchdown. Prepare cabin for arrival." Walter sat up straighter, the flickering runway lights reflected in his eyes. The chain reaction had begun. A whisper, a call, a demand for accountability. Before long, the entire world would know. But right here, in coach seats to first class, justice had been served. Quietly, firmly, without fanfare. Amanda caught Walter's eye again as she passed, and this time she offered a small, sincere smile. It was redemption in a fraction of a second. Walter returned it with a gentle nod. Beyond the cabin door, the hustle of ground operations awaited. Boardroom briefings, press statements, corporate apologies. But inside, for these passengers and crew, the moment held its own power. The undeniable shift when one person stands up and the world shifts in response. As the aircraft descended, Walter folded his hands and closed his eyes. He'd set the wheels in motion, but the real work would come on the tarmac and beyond, in the boardrooms and training rooms of Sky Nation Airways. For now, though, he allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The ripple he'd created was spreading fast, and it all started with one quiet call. And sometimes, that's all you need to change everything. By the time Flight 7042 touched down in Atlanta, the world already knew Walter Pearson's name. His quiet authority had triggered a chain reaction that spread far beyond the cabin of a Boeing 7037. As the wheels met the runway, a dozen phones buzzed simultaneously in first class. Notifications from news apps, social feeds, and text threads lighting up with clips of Amanda Reed tearing Walter's boarding pass and his calm, commanding phone call. The hashtag Sky Nation scandal was trending worldwide. Walter gathered his briefcase and stood, offering a polite nod to the crew. Behind him, executives in crisp suits watched with a mix of awe and anxiety. Flight attendants hurried down the aisle, gathering stray service items, their previous routine replaced by the urgent choreography of a crisis. In the passenger lounge, Amanda waited by the door, wringing her hands. Her earlier apology felt inadequate now that the scandal had gone global. She'd heard rumors on her backstage headset. Sky Nation's stock ticker, Sky, was plummeting. Word was the airline on Friday had been trading at $42.50 per share. By landing time, it had dropped nearly 15%, shaving off approximately $260 million. 0 cents in market capitalization in a single afternoon. She tried to steady her breath, but her chest felt tight. A junior attendant, Sophia, slipped a tablet into her hand. "Look," Sophia whispered, pointing at a live financial chart. "They're blaming this on the PR nightmare. We're about to lose that $20 million 0 cents ad deal with Horizon Media. They pulled their campaign this morning." Amanda stared at the screen, stomach sinking. Horizon Media had been one of Sky Nation's biggest marketing partners, responsible for multi-Melmo commercials and sponsorships. Losing $20 million in ad revenue wasn't just a line item. It was a gut punch to the airline's brand relaunch under Walter's quiet stewardship. Meanwhile, Walter moved through the crowd with purpose. He slipped into a private conference room, formerly empty but now filling with anxious faces. On a long mahogany table sat cups of coffee and a cluster of laptops. The board of directors was already assembling via video link. The outside world demanded answers, and they wanted Walter's voice front and center. He closed the door softly behind him, removed his jacket and draped it over a chair. The room fell silent. In that hush, he felt the weight of every skittish investor call, every frantic email from PR, every tremor in the trading algorithms. "Mr. Pearson," began Elena Grant, Sky Nation's CFO, her voice tight with restraint. "The board has just reviewed today's market performance. Our stock is down 15%, ad partners are pulling out, and media outlets are calling this an airline meltdown. What's our next move?" Walter folded his hands and met her gaze calmly. "Thank you, Elena. First, we own this. We'll issue a transparent statement, apologize for the incident, explain our policies, and outline steps to prevent anything like this from happening again. Second, we launch mandatory bias awareness training for every employee, starting with customer-facing staff. Third, I'll personally lead a press conference tomorrow morning to reaffirm our commitment to dignity and respect." Elena exhaled, relief flickering in her eyes. That plan, if executed swiftly, might stabilize the situation. We'll need to coordinate with legal, compliance, and communications immediately. As they spoke, the flight crew broadcasted a brief in-flight announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for flying with us. Captain Pearson and the board apologize for any inconvenience today's events may have caused. We aim to learn and improve, ensuring every passenger feels respected." We appreciate your patience." In first class, passengers listened with interest. Some exchanged approving smiles. Others quietly recorded the statement for their own social channels. The atmosphere, once tense, shifted toward cautious optimism. Back in the conference room, Walter tapped a fingertip on the table. "Let's turn this around. Errors happen when systems fail. We'll fix the system. We'll earn back trust not through slogans but through concrete action." He could see the board responding. A few nodded vigorously. Elena pulled up a draft press release on her laptop. Sky Nation Airways regrets the unfortunate incident involving the mishandling of a valid boarding pass. We recognize that respect and courtesy must guide every interaction, and we are immediately implementing enhanced training and accountability measures under the guidance of our owner and chairman, Walter Pearson. Within minutes, the release went live across media wires. Journalists picked it up. Within hours, top news outlets ran stories with page one headlines, "Sky Nation's chairman speaks out," and "Airline pledges culture overhaul." Meanwhile, on trading floors, analysts recalibrated. Social media sentiment trackers ticked from negative to mixed, driven by optimism that the airline's swift response signaled genuine accountability rather than spin. By evening trading, shares had recouped half their losses, settling down around $38.50, still below the day's high, but showing signs of investor confidence. Amanda watched the press conference clip on her tablet. Walter's composed, earnest delivery, his firm commitment to change. She felt a swell of both shame and hope. Shame for her part in the scandal. Hope that the airline could become a better place. She tapped a message to Sophia. "Book me into the new training program." In the subdued light of the conference room, Walter offered an encouraging smile. "Every journey begins with the first step," he said. "We've taken ours. Tomorrow we'll take the next." Behind him, Elena sent the revised press release to journalists. Around them, the hum of collaboration replaced the earlier tension. The crisis was far from over, but an unmistakable shift had occurred. The airline's destiny was now defined by its willingness to learn from its mistakes. Outside, the evening sky blazed with the fiery colors of dusk. Through the windows, Walter could see Atlanta's skyline, bright lights and bustling streets, a city always moving forward. He straightened his jacket, feeling the familiar thrill of purpose. The ripples from today's storm would reach every corner of Sky Nation Airways, but with steady leadership, they could become waves that carried the company toward true equity and respect. Because sometimes, the real power of karma isn't just in the fall, it's in the rise that follows. Amanda Reed sat frozen behind her tidy mahogany desk in Sky Nation's ground operations office. Her polished nails tapped the lacquered surface in a nervous rhythm. Just 24 hours ago, she'd felt untouchable, confident in her conviction that Walter Pearson had no rightful place in the first-class lounge. Now, she was thrust into a whirlwind she couldn't control. Her phone buzzed incessantly. Emails flagged urgent, text messages from colleagues, and social media alerts collapsing in on themselves like a swarm. Even in her pocket, her ID badge vibrated as internal notifications flooded her inbox. The subject lines made her heart sink. Mandatory meeting, in-flight services, 2 p.m. Board of Directors inquiry, immediate response required. Media relations, your statement requested. Amanda closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and tried to steady her pounding pulse. She pressed her fingers against the sides of her head, willing the ache to subside. But each new beep made her stomach twist tighter. A knock on her office door snapped her back to reality. 2 uniformed security officers stood at attention in the hallway, badges gleaming. Behind them, Elena Grant, the airline's formidable CFO, entered without waiting for an invitation. "Elena," Amanda said, voice wavering as she rose. She smoothed her skirt, attempting a professional composure she didn't feel. What's happening? Elena's gaze was cool and measured. Amanda, please, sit. She nodded to one of the officers who closed the door behind them. You're here because the board and executive committee need a full accounting of yesterday's incident at JFK. We've seen the footage. We have statements from passengers. We have tweets, blog posts, media inquiries. Amanda sank into her chair, spine stiff. I'm prepared to explain. Elena laid a stack of printed screenshots on the desk. Images of Amanda tearing Walter's pass, passengers' shocked faces, the viral hashtag trending globally. This, Elena said, her finger tracing the scrolling tweets, has cost us millions. Our stock dropped nearly 15%. Our key sponsors are reconsidering contracts. Amanda's mouth went dry. She swallowed and leaned forward. Elena, I thought he was a fraud. I never imagined he actually owned the airline. You thought? Elena interrupted, tone clipped. Mr. Pearson was not merely someone. He closed a $1,200,000,000 0-cents deal last night. He's the owner and chairman. She raised an eyebrow. Yet you fully ignored the manifest notation and security protocols. You publicly humiliated our chairman. Do you understand the gravity? Amanda's vision blurred. She pressed her palms against the desk. I made a terrible mistake, but I was just following what I believed were standard procedures. I had no malicious intent. Elena exhaled sharply. Intent doesn't matter, results do. We're talking liability for wrongful detention, defamation risk, ruin to our brand. I need your statement, now. And you'll be on administrative leave pending our investigation. The words administrative leave struck Amanda harder than any rebuke. She inhaled, bracing herself. Leave? She echoed, voice small. You mean, I'm suspended? Elena nodded. Effective immediately. You can gather your personal belongings. Security will escort you out. You'll return tomorrow to sit with Human Resources and Legal. In the meantime, you'll draft a public apology for our website and social channels. Amanda's throat tightened. A public apology, she mouthed. Elena slid a tablet across the desk, open to a blank document titled Sky Nation Public Statement, Draft. The officer standing guard folded her arms, eyes cold but sympathetic. Amanda picked up the stylus, hands trembling as she tapped the screen. She stared at the blinking cursor, heart pounding, mind racing through possible opening lines. I am deeply sorry, or I regret that. She glanced back at Elena, whose expression was unreadable. It wasn't enough to be sorry. She had to sound genuine, while corporate lawyers dissected every word. She tapped. On behalf of Sky Nation Airways, I sincerely apologize to Mr. Walter Pearson and to all our passengers for my actions yesterday. I misguidedly questioned Mr. Pearson's boarding pass, causing him public humiliation. I deeply regret the pain and inconvenience this has caused. She paused and reread the draft. It felt hollow. She needed more. Accountability, reflection, commitment to change. Fingers hovering, she added, I acknowledge that my conduct fell far short of the standards of respect and professionalism we uphold at Sky Nation. I accept full responsibility and welcome any training or corrective measures deemed necessary. I am committed to learning from this mistake and ensuring it never happens again. She tapped save, her chest aching as she watched the document auto-sync to the company's server, accessible by PR, legal, and the board. Elena, she said quietly, voice barely above a whisper, what else can I do? Elena studied her for a moment, then softened fractionally. Work with our training department. Helped design that bias awareness program Mr. Pearson announced. If you show genuine dedication, you may help us demonstrate that Sky Nation truly intends to change. Amanda's heart pounded at the offer amid the storm. I'd like that, she whispered. Elena nodded curtly. We'll see. She stood, signaling the officers. You have 30 minutes to clear out your desk, then you'll report to HR. As Amanda packed her personal effects, her favorite framed photo of a perfect safety demo dance routine, her little potted succulent, she realized the full scope of her reckoning. What began as a moment of arrogance had unleashed a corporate crisis. Now she faced not only suspension and public shame, but the chance to confront her biases head-on. In the sprawling halls of Sky Nation's headquarters, Amanda's footsteps echoed hollowly. She passed rows of executives in glass offices, their gazes averted or curious. Staff whispered as she passed. That was her. I heard she ripped his ticket. She's in big trouble. Amanda's throat burned. She had underestimated his power. She had misjudged dignity itself. Yet, behind her trembling resolve, a spark flickered. Maybe this was her moment to learn, to grow, to help reshape the culture she'd betrayed. As the bright afternoon sun hit the marble floors, she squared her shoulders and lifted her chin. The path ahead was daunting, but if sincerity and effort could make amends, she would walk it. Even if it meant rebuilding her career from scratch, because some mistakes demand more than an apology. They demand transformation. And Amanda Reed, suspended flight attendant, was about to face the hardest flight of her life. The jet bridge was a narrow corridor of hushed anticipation as passengers filed off Flight 742. Many had their phones out, screens still glowing with the live press conference clip where Walter Pearson had pledged sweeping changes. Now, in person, he stepped off the aircraft first, adjusting his leather jacket, the owner's manifest tucked safely in his briefcase. Just behind him, Richard Michaels, the airline's longtime CEO, paced toward the cabin door, flanked by Elena Grant and a handful of senior executives. Richard's usual easygoing smile was replaced by a serious, almost solemn expression. The crowd of first-class travelers slowed, sensing something unscripted was about to unfold. Richard tapped lightly on the PA handset. "Excuse me, everyone." His voice carried clearly through the jet bridge. "Before you disembark, I need a moment of your attention." His tone brooked no argument. Smartphones rose higher, pointed toward the door. Walter halted and nodded a polite greeting. Then Richard turned to face the assembled passengers and crew. "I know many of you have seen the video of this morning's events. You've heard my statement. But it's not enough for you to hear from me over the airwaves. You deserve to hear directly from the man at the heart of this airline's future." He stepped aside, motioning toward Walter. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Mr. Walter Pearson, owner and chairman of Sky Nation Airways." A ripple of murmur spread. Phones clicked as passengers recorded the moment. A woman in a tailored suit gasped softly. "He really did it." Richard continued, voice steady. "Mr. Pearson purchased this airline last night in a $1,200,000,000 0 cents transaction. He did so because he believes every passenger and employee deserves dignity and respect, regardless of background or appearance." He paused, letting the words sink in. It took a painful mistake, tearing a valid boarding pass, to force us all to examine our blind spots. For that, I apologize on behalf of Sky Nation. At that admission, Walter's gaze flicked to Amanda Reed, who stood off to the side by the service cart. Her posture was rigid, eyes downcast, nails twisted around the strap of a small service bag. She'd been summoned off the flight and into this crowd in uniform. Another subtle statement that today's events had changed everything. Richard pulled out a printed email on his tablet and held it up so that a few onboard journalists could see. Here is the manifest annotation. Owner and chairman. Here is the security log marking Mr. Pearson's identification valid at 6:55 AM. And here, he swiped to the next screen, is the brief transcript of his call to operations at 7:10 AM, requesting our own press conference. Everything is documented, nothing hidden. A hush fell. The weight of undeniable evidence hung in the air. Passengers exchanged looks of astonishment. A retired couple froze mid-step, the husband's hand still on his wife's arm. A young entrepreneur on a live stream stifled an expletive of shock. Richard lowered the tablet and turned to Amanda. "Miss Reed." His voice softened, but his tone remained firm. "Your actions were unacceptable. You humiliated a man who not only paid for this airline, but who has dedicated his life to service and excellence. The board has placed you on suspension, but I believe in accountability and rehabilitation over punishment alone." Amanda's head snapped up, tears welling in her eyes. She swallowed. I'm deeply sorry," she said, voice trembling. "I see now that I was wrong. Wrong to judge, wrong to act without verifying. I accept full responsibility." Walter stepped forward. Despite the tense moment, his composure remained unshaken. He offered Amanda a measured nod. "Thank you, Ms. Reed. Apology accepted." His voice carried quiet authority, but there was no malice, only a firm commitment to fairness. "I hope you will join me in building a better airline." A ripple of applause began at the back of the line, spreading toward the front. Passengers who had recorded every second now lowered their phones, giving genuine, heartfelt claps. Some stood, clapping. The retired couple took each other's hands, nodding in approval. The entrepreneur flashed a triumphant grin at his camera. Richard motioned to Elena, who pressed a button on the PA. "Thank you, Mr. Pearson, Mr. Michaels. We will now proceed with disembarkation in an orderly fashion. And Mr. Pearson, thank you for your leadership." Walter smiled briefly and turned toward Amanda. "I look forward to seeing you in our new training sessions," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "We'll learn together." Amanda managed a choked nod. Her uniform felt heavier than ever, but she squared her shoulders, drawing on a reservoir of humility and resolve. She stepped aside, making way for the passengers, but stayed within Walter's line of sight. As the passengers filed off, the cabin emptied, but the moment lingered. Sky Nation's destiny had shifted, not through scandal alone, but through the clarity of truth, the power of undeniable evidence, and the courage to acknowledge mistakes publicly. Walter paused in the doorway, looking back at the empty rows of leather seats, now silent witnesses to the ripple his ownership had caused. He turned and walked down the jet bridge toward the warm Atlanta morning, ready for the next phase. Real change from the boardroom to every gate, lounge, and cabin of the airline he now owned. In that simple, public reveal, witnessed by all, Sky Nation's new chapter began, grounded in the certainty that respect and truth would guide its path forward. The moment was electric. Just outside Gate 17, a small crowd of passengers and crew had gathered, phones at the ready. Walter Pearson and CEO Richard Michaels stood side by side on the jet bridge steps, an unspoken signal that the old rules were over. Amanda Reed hovered nearby in her crisp uniform, guilt and uncertainty warring on her face. Richard raised his hand for silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice carrying over the ripple of murmurs. "Yesterday's events were unacceptable. Sky Nation Airways holds every guest and every employee to the highest standards of respect and professionalism. When those standards aren't met, we act immediately." He turned to Amanda, who stood rooted to the spot. A hush fell as passengers strained to hear. Amanda Reed, Richard continued, your actions yesterday humiliated our chairman in a public lounge. You violated our code of conduct and betrayed the trust of everyone here. Amanda's heart pounded. She opened her mouth to apologize, but Richard held up a hand. This isn't about apologies, he said firmly. It's about accountability. Walter stepped forward, calm but authoritative. Effective immediately, Amanda Reed is terminated from her position at SkyNation Airways, he announced. This decision reflects our commitment to zero tolerance for discrimination of any kind. A collective gasp rose from the crowd. A seasoned business traveler in a tailored gray suit clicked record on her smartphone. A group of tourists exchanged shocked glances. A mother with 2 young children tightened her grip on her son's hand, nodding in approval. Amanda's eyes brimmed with tears. She tried to steady her breathing as Alina Grant, the CFO, approached with a severance packet and her final paycheck. "I'm sorry," Amanda whispered, voice cracking. "I never meant—" Richard interrupted gently. "Your intent is irrelevant now. What matters is that you must face the consequences of your actions." He motioned to Elena. "Please, escort Ms. Reed to HR." Sophia James, the junior attendant who had spoken up earlier, watched from the side with a mixture of relief and compassion. She understood that the spotlight had shifted from Walter's quiet dignity to the very real cost of Amanda's mistake, and now, of course, to the outcome that would set a new standard. As Amanda was guided away, Walter addressed the remaining passengers. "We thank you for your patience and understanding. Today marks a turning point for SkyNation Airways. We will implement comprehensive bias awareness training across our entire staff, and we will make sure every traveler, no matter who they are, feels welcome and respected." A ripple of applause followed his words. Some passengers offered thumbs up, others simply smiled. In that moment, the airline's promise felt genuine, not just corporate rhetoric. Down the jet bridge, Amanda paused as she passed a group of ground staff. One porter gave her a sympathetic nod, another averted his eyes. She swallowed hard and followed Elena into the terminal, the hum of activity swallowing their footsteps. Back on the bridge, Walter and Richard watched her go, then faced the crowd again. "Thank you," Walter said softly. "Let's move forward together." As the passengers streamed into the terminal, the tension melted into a sense of relief. Phones buzzed with congratulatory texts and social posts. Analysts on trading floors were already updating their reports. SkyNation's stock ticked upward, buoyed by decisive leadership. Richard exhaled, glancing at Walter. "That was, decisive," he said. Walter nodded. "Justice needs no theatrics. It simply needs to be clear and unwavering." Richard smiled. "Here's to a new chapter." And as the passengers dispersed, some still talking about the dramatic dismissal, others marveling at the calm strength of their new chairman, one truth stood out. At SkyNation Airways, discrimination would no longer go unchallenged, and the price of prejudice had been paid in full, right before their eyes. The early morning sun cast a warm glow over the Atlanta tarmac as Walter Pearson stepped off the jet bridge for the final time. He paused, looking back at the familiar gray fuselage of the Boeing 737 that had carried him through so many symbolic moments. His quiet arrival, Amanda Reed's costly mistake, the chain reaction that followed, and the public reckoning that reshaped SkyNation's future. Richard Michaels fell into step beside him. "You handled that beautifully," Richard said softly, adjusting his tie. "I've been in this business for 20 years, and I've never seen such a calm, unwavering response." Walter offered a small smile. "Thank you, Richard. It wasn't about drama, it was about setting a clear example." He looked around at the freshly scrubbed terminal walls, at the ground crews preparing for another day's work. That example has to last longer than today. Richard nodded. Tomorrow, the board meets to finalize the training program. Then it's rollout across our entire operation. Gate agents, flight attendants, pilots, maintenance teams, no one's exempt. Walter's eyes lit with quiet determination. Exactly. It's one thing to fire one person for an egregious error. It's another to rebuild a culture so no one ever feels they can judge or be judged unfairly. That's the real work. They walked through the sliding doors into the bustling terminal. Passengers from Flight 742 paused in their steps to greet Walter with nods of respect. Some offered thumbs up, others simply smiled. In that unspoken moment, he felt the true measure of change, not in boardrooms or stock price charts, but in everyday human connection. A notification pinged on his phone. He glanced down to see a message from Elena Grant. Tyler James called. He just got accepted into the cadet program. He starts next month. He thanks you. Walter's chest warmed. Tyler James, the eager 19-year-old neighbor he had mentored, was the living proof of progress. He tapped a quick reply. That's fantastic news. Tell him I'm proud, and he better be ready for those simulator scores. He slipped the phone back into his pocket. Decades ago, his father had told him, "Greatness isn't given, son. It's earned every single day." Today, that lesson echoed louder than ever. They reached the curb, where Walter's black SUV idled. A driver opened the rear door and offered a respectful bow. Walter climbed in, letting the city's morning energy wash over him through the tinted window. As the car pulled away, he watched Richard walk back toward the tarmac. Partners in purpose, ready to steer Sky Nation into its next chapter. Inside the SUV, Walter allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. He thought of every boarding pass he'd struggled to have honored, every slight he'd swallowed in the name of survival and service. He thought of Amanda Reed's silence, of her public dismissal, and of how, through accountability and education, the airline could heal rather than just punish. Traffic swept around him, a river of cars flowing toward countless destinations. In his mind, the terminal lights and lounge interiors he'd navigated merged with memories of hangars and desert skies. Both worlds demanded rigor, precision, and above all, respect. The future stretched before him like an open runway. He would oversee the bias unawareness curriculum, sit with frontline staff, share his own stories, tales of danger, camaraderie, and the quiet courage required to stand up for what's right. And once those lessons took root, he would look back and know that Sky Nation's transformation was more than a corporate turnaround. It was a declaration that dignity and equality were flights we must all board together. As the SUV slid into highway traffic, Walter pressed his forehead against the cool glass, eyes closed for a heartbeat. In that pause, he felt the weight of his father's legacy and the promise of safer skies ahead for pilots, passengers, and every soul who dared to dream beyond prejudice. And with that, he leaned back in his seat, ready for the journey onward, wherever it might take him.